Good afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Hello, Shabbar. I'm very well. Yeah, bit hot, so I'm sitting downstairs in my kitchen because my office is too hot. We're in the third heat wave of the summer, but other than that, I'm very well. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm looking forward to England versus Norway on Saturday. So we're
Oh
recording
yes.
this on Thursday, 9th July, only a couple of days away from a big game against Norway. So yeah,
Oh
getting
man.
getting excited for the crunch end of the tournament. Great stuff. We're going to be carrying on our mini series on this topic of growth. And
Uh-huh.
actually my sort of inquiry into this idea that actually degrowth, less is more. So this constant pursuit of growth for growth's sake, not actually being as wonderful as we've been told through various economists and politicians and just the general narrative, which is that everything's going to be better when the number grows. And we've started to sort of challenge that and unpick it through a bit of my reading. And we've moved on to a couple of threads which is linked to this. One of those was around this consumer story where we looked at how we are essentially consumers in this story of growth where we're just kind of constantly marketed to and led to believe that in more consumption, we're going to be better off somehow.
And if I just add to that, it's even deeper than that. Led to believe that who we are fundamentally are consumers. So we're referred to as consumers. So it's not just a behavior of consuming, it's an identity, which is even deeper, of I am a consumer. And then we talked, didn't we, about, well, could we wake up in the morning and think I'm a citizen rather than a
Right.
consumer? Yeah.
Exactly. So that's sort of where we've reached, and we're going to take a little bit of a different direction now. Do you want to sort of post a little
Yeah.
bit about where we're heading?
Yeah, well, and also from the consumer thing, then we looked, I think last time, at different things that could grow. So if I'm not a consumer, and maybe I think of I'm a citizen, we looked again at this story of growth. And if I woke up in the morning and felt myself a free, creative participant in society, I still might choose consciously to grow some things. I just wouldn't be on the consuming treadmill of always growing a number. So we talked about I might grow other things like health, love, wisdom, connection, etc. So yeah, we've kind of talked about the identity of how we get stuck in the growth story. And I suppose we started to look at how could we transform the story of growth? Or how could we become conscious so that we choose to do things differently? And I guess that leads us on to today's episode, and probably this will be another two-parter. And I'm going to hand back to you in a second, because even once we spot this stuff, even once, for example, someone comes on one of my money workshops and they go, oh yeah, I would like to live with certain things at the center. I don't want to just chase the number. Or even in your own journey, you start to go, oh, I'm not sure as a financial advisor, I should just be about future financial returns. It can still feel quite scary or challenging or just downright difficult to consistently tell a different story in the face of the mainstream story. And when we touched on that idea very early on in this series, I said, well, that's about power. It's about understanding power and how it operates. So we're going to do a couple around power, and particularly power of doing things differently and speaking differently, maybe against the mainstream. So over to you before we go into a few ideas and theory. Just say more, maybe from your experience, what is difficult? Is it scary? Is it challenging? Is it embarrassing? Like, what does it feel like to try and start to talk differently about this stuff or ask different questions?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that's sort of puzzled me a bit since I've started to think about things differently. And there is this feeling that, well, there is this narrative out there, and it feels very hardwired and almost ingrained that this is the way that kind of normal people go about their lives, right? Trying to grow a number personally, the economy is trying to grow a number. It's all about growing. And to question that and challenge that almost makes me feel a little bit stupid, I think
Interesting.
is the word that probably labels it for me.
Mm.
And within that stupidity, there is also an element of, well, you're not very you're not very progressive, or you're not very forward thinking. And as human beings, we should always be looking to grow and advance. And that narrative keeps ringing round in my mind. And so start to question, well, it feels really scary to
Mm,
start voicing these alternative
mm,
opinions. I'm quite relieved and comforted by the fact that it seems that there are quite a few economists out there and
mm,
thinkers who have been talking about this. It's just not been on my radar. So I think, as we spoke
mm,
offline, I might have been hanging around with the wrong crowd for this particular purpose of learning and gaining
mm,
new
mm,
perspectives.
mm.
But it seems that that crowd probably doesn't have the voice that it deserves, or
You mean the one that are questioning,
yeah, the
or
one
less
that's questioning,
conventional,
or,
for sure.
or even the economists and the thinkers around that area may be sidelined and are probably marginalized and made to appear stupid and backward
Mm,
by the mainstream.
mm,
That's just a hypothesis. I'm not sure if it's totally accurate, but I sense from what I've seen in the news around climate stuff and the people that talk about changing ecology, they're very much marginalized and very much poo-pooed for that sort of narrative. So these are the things that have been bubbling around. And I know that you said, well, yeah, there's this issue of power that
mm,
maybe is the overarching sort of I don't know what it quite is, but
mm.
definitely something we're going to explore today.
Yeah. Well, I think in my language, all the things you're talking about, so it makes me feel stupid. I'm judged. Oh, it should be all about growth. It's scary. People are marginalized. Those are experiences we all have in a way where if we try to think differently or speak out differently or go against the prevailing norm. Um, I found it very useful in my own kind of learning and in my own life to understand we're talking about power. When
Mm.
we experience those things and say those things, it's because power is present. And very often we feel them. And it's not we go, oh, I'm experiencing a power dynamic. We don't. We go, oh, I feel scared or I feel stupid or never said the thing that I really wanted to say at the conference. Or, oh, even though I wanted to have a different conversation with my client, I ended up getting anxious and having the same conversation. That's what we say. But one useful, if you like, frame is we're talking about power. Okay.
That makes
So
sense.
today, yeah. So today we can talk about that. I'll share the most useful kind of framework on understanding different types of power that I've come across and have used in my work. Um, but first, maybe a couple of stories. Your story reminds me, or your experience of this classic folk tale or fairy tale about the Emperor's New Clothes.
Yeah.
Most people know it, and I can't remember exactly, but basically, the king or the emperor it asks for the finest costume in the land, and someone gives him basically nothing. I can't remember why,
Yeah.
and says, "Oh no, it's just incredibly beautiful and wonderful, and it's the most subtle cloth." But there's nothing there, so he goes out stark bollock naked, and no one is willing to say, "Hang on, this is ridiculous. There's
Yeah.
nothing there. You're naked," and everyone goes along with it, even though they can see there's nothing there. It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy, but everyone goes along with it, right? That's power. Now they would say, "Well, we're just scared," or some would even say, "Oh no, we thought it was wonderful," or some psychologically they've looked
What
into it. Some would
denial?
even say denial, projection, fantasy, all of these things. But the bottom line is, if I say, "Your Majesty, you've got no clothes on," I'm at risk. I might be killed. I might be sent out from the court. I might lose my position, might be thrown into jail. This is power. And the only one who will speak the truth in this case is the young innocent, the young boy who
Yeah, the young boy.
and in many kind of folk tales and Shakespearean plays, it's the fool. So it's either the
Yeah.
innocent child or the slightly crazy fool who get to tell the truth because they're not afraid, because they haven't got wrapped into all the stuff that we get wrapped into as adults about I'll lose my position, I'll get in trouble, boom, boom, boom. So that's one story. Does that resonate in some way?
Yeah, no, it just makes me chuckle because there
Yeah.
is an element of that going on, I'm sure,
Yes.
and in many areas of life.
In many areas. And, I won't divert too much, but we're in the third heat wave. Climate scientists have been consistently saying something really huge and terrifying and calamitous is happening. And somehow most people are just like, well, we don't want to look at it or talk
Mm,
about it or think about it. And yeah, it's taken decades and decades and decades for these people to be taken seriously. So that's about
mm,
power. Let me read. It's another story. So I'll tell the story first, and then I'll read a few excerpts from the letter, and perhaps we can put a link into it in our notes. In 2008, people will remember in 2008, there was a massive global crash. There was a banking crisis, and it was largely provoked by these crazy kind of credit default swaps. The details aren't important, but these sort of financial instruments that no one had fully understood and ended up crashing the market. And then there was this massive bailout, and arguably we're still living through the consequences of that bailout. Again, the details aren't important. People will remember there was a big crash in 2008. And I think a year or so later, the Queen was visiting the London School of Economics, I don't know, to open a new building or unveil a
mhm,
statue or something, and was walking around and apparently asked the people at the London School of Economics, why did nobody see this coming? Why did no one see the crash coming? And they all sort of had a load of guff about unexpected this, that, and the other, and
mm,
no one could have seen it coming, etc. And in response to the LSE is one of the most mainstream economic, institutions in the world, right? In response to their response to the Queen's very good question, like, why did all you clever economics professors not see this coming? And they said, oh, no one could have seen it coming. Another group of economists, professors at other universities, wrote a letter to the Queen. And I'm going to read some of that now because I think it's really interesting. It's dated 10th of August 2009, so only a year later. Madam, that's how you write to Her Majesty the Queen. I won't read the whole thing. We are writing in response to the question you posed at the London School of Economics in November, asking why few economists had foreseen the credit crunch, and the answer to you from Professors Besley and Hennessy. And they said, yeah, we agree with many of the points, but we regard their overall analysis as inadequate because it fails to acknowledge any deficiency in the training or the culture of economists themselves, right? And so let me read a few other bits. Right. They say their letter rightly mentions that some of the best mathematical minds involved in risk management had frequently lost sight of the bigger picture. Well, Shabba, when we're talking about growth, we're saying for most people it's a mathematical thing, but they lose sight of the bigger picture. We've already talked about that. And they say the failure to foresee the timing, extent, and severity of the crisis had many causes. It was a failure of the collective imagination of many bright people to understand the risks to the system as a whole. So the London School of Economics professors did acknowledge that when you just have brilliant mathematical minds doing kind of equations and calculations, somehow you miss the big picture, the system as a whole. And you and I have talked about that quite a lot. But I want to go further because they then go further. In addition, we suggest, this is the people writing the letter, the responsibility lies at the door of leading influential economists in the UK and elsewhere. In recent years, economics has turned virtually into a branch of applied mathematics, and it has become detached from real world institutions and events. And I think this is so relevant to what we've been talking about, growth and also power. The London School of Economics professors do not consider, they say, how the preference for mathematical technique over real world substance diverted many economists from looking at the vital whole. Economics at the moment does not consider the omission of psychology, philosophy, economic history from the current education of economists. It mentions neither the highly questionable belief in universal rationality nor the efficient markets hypothesis. In other words, they're saying if you just do maths and believe everything economics says, and you ignore the real world, the whole system, and questions of psychology, philosophy, history, you're going to get this mess. And I'm just going to see if there's a couple more quotes here. Yeah, they basically say that, so I won't go through it. But I think that's super, super interesting, because what they're effectively saying is the answer you got from the leading economist at the leading UK institution basically, well, we couldn't have seen it happening, but does not accept that economics has just become a branch of applied maths that has no connection to either the world out there or psychology, philosophy, or history. And I would say it's exactly for the current fixation on growth.
Yeah, highly interesting. And the thing that jumped out at me is that, yeah, economics is a social science.
Well, it should be.
Well, yeah, well, it was always presented as a social science when I was studying it at university. And maybe that holds true, that we have gone down a branch of economics which is highly mathematical, and we live in a world where everything is sort of based on algorithms and mathematics, and we are missing the bigger picture. And I think that's exactly where we're headed at the moment, is that we try and put everything into a model, and maybe that just doesn't work for human beings in parts. So where do we go from here?
Well, let's hang out here for a minute or two, and then I want to talk about how this relates to power, which was the question, and comes back to why is it so scary to challenge this stuff. Do you know the root of the word economics? Do you know where it comes from? Did they teach you that when you studied?
Oh, I wouldn't even remember. I was too busy doing other things at university.
Fair enough. Yeah, good answer. So economics, ecos, has the same root as the word ecology, right? It means home, the home. So economics is the management of the home. Now, what's interesting, if you think about it, is our real home. It's, yes, our household where we live, and it's our planet, right?
Right.
If the planet isn't healthy, our home isn't healthy. So again, there is no reason why economics, if it did its real job, could think about the big picture, how to take care of the home planet. It could include, yes, maths, of course, but some insights about psychology. What do we really want? What really makes us happy? Philosophy, what's ethical? What's moral? History, how have civilizations died out, gone beyond their means in the past? There's no reason economics couldn't do all of those things, but it doesn't. It's become, as these professors say, a branch of applied mathematics. What it really is the care of the home. So then we come on to the question of, why is it so hard? And this is true today, for people listening today, we're going to apply this idea to talking against economics, or if you're a financial advisor, doing it differently. And then in the next episode, we'll talk about what exactly the same ideas mean for regular people, about just trying to do things differently with your own money, your own pension, your own savings. So although the examples we use today will be particularly around finance and people who work there, those listening, please start applying this to you, and we'll follow up with that next time. So why is it so hard to challenge this stuff, right? So let me offer us some ideas, and then we'll do a frame. But I'd love also for you to really think about your experience. The first thing is, I think most of us carry ideas that people who are really, really good at maths and numbers are somehow really, really clever in a certain way. And if we don't feel we're clever in that way, usually instead of going, well, they're really clever with numbers, but I really understand life or health or a whole load of other things, often somehow we project power onto them. It's what
I mean, that happens
psychologists...
all the time.
Right.
That's like everywhere you look, and it could be professionally, on a local level. The person who's sort of good at business, understands their business numbers, is given a certain level of standing compared to someone that doesn't. I mean, I see that all the time. Or even when clients come to me, the fact that a lot of clients feel inferior because they don't understand maybe the technical stuff or the numbers part of their life, they're automatically in a position of less power. I was going to
Well,
say
they probably
to
put themselves
themselves. Yeah.
unconsciously in, because what we do as a culture, and we'll get more into why we do this, we easily project power onto people who seem very assured, very confident, and in this case,
Yeah.
in certain dimensions, very, very clever with numbers. Well, they might be clever with numbers, but they might be really stupid with relationships or understanding the planet or even knowing
Yeah.
how to take care of themselves. At a deeper level, we're all clever in some ways and stupid in others, but we live in society that ascribes value to a certain sort of cleverness and ignores the
Yeah.
value in other forms of cleverness. And then if we get caught up in that, we can easily project our power onto maths boffins, even when a bit in our guts goes, I'm sure that's not quite right, or it
Mm.
doesn't seem to be making everyone happy. But it's like we invalidate our own voice because we sort of don't trust our own knowing or our own lived experience as much as, let's call them, these maths boffins,
Yeah. The quants
the
that,
quants.
yeah, who are obviously very good with numbers. But as we've been saying, not everything measured in numbers that goes up is necessarily going to produce good outcomes.
We can grow the economy and destroy the planet. And is that intelligent? Well, I'm not sure it is. We're back to the emperor's clothes. Did you have any more you wanted to say on
No,
that? That
no,
idea
but
of power and
no, but it's just interesting because it kind of happens again. A lot of this is unconscious, right? It almost happens by default
how,
that the economists or the people that are in charge of the numbers are put on a pedestal that not many other people are in society, simply because we feel, or what it's interesting, what are we tying up in the number, right? There's going to be a feeling that we're going to be all right if the people that are good with numbers sort out the numbers and everything else will fall into place. Well, clearly,
yes,
I think that's where
yes,
the majority of people are thinking that I'm not that clever. I don't have that much knowledge around maths, numbers, this, that, the other, or the economy. We'll leave it to these people in suits who talk, and we don't understand them, but they're good with the numbers. So
they can take care of it.
everything's going to be
So
okay.
so actually, we're a little bit back to this idea we talked 2 podcasts ago about I'm a subject, I'm a consumer, I'm a citizen.
Mm,
One of the things many of us do is we give over our power to people who have clipboards or equations or suits and ties or seem to understand a certain language. We don't. And in a way, we make ourselves subject to their policy.
yeah.
If we're citizens, we might speak out more. Let me give you a quick example, and then we'll get into a framework about power. If I get some guy in to fix my boiler, or if I go to the garage, right, those guys have a whole language I don't understand, right? They have a whole technical language and understanding. I don't understand it. And actually, sometimes I can feel a bit nervous asking a stupid question when I go into the garage. I say, you need a new blah, 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 blah. But I've learned to go, actually, I have no idea what is it. Could you explain what that is? So any time you go into a space where there is a sort of technical language and you don't know that language, the truth is you don't know that language. That doesn't mean you're stupid. And it doesn't need to make you less powerful, but we often feel that. But strangely, usually if you go into the garage, you might feel a bit stupid or a bit embarrassed, but you don't fundamentally put that person on a pedestal above you. You just think, well, they're a really good mechanic,
Yeah.
right? And I feel a bit stupid that I don't understand it. But I trust them to look after my car. Well, it seems like we do the same with these maths boffins, but somehow because as a culture, we put a lot of value onto people who are very clever, intellectual with maths, we give over too much power and we don't question and we don't feel we can question. So I think that's interesting. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's not just that they're doing it. It's not just a power grab. It's that we project power onto them and then we don't ask questions and we don't want to speak out. And that's to do with our own connection with our power and our shame, actually.
Right. So it's almost like there's an individual responsibility to try and shift that.
Yes, absolutely. Once you see it, I would say we can all contribute as citizens to society
Right.
by asking questions and by pointing things out and say, I do not understand this. And how come dear politician, you tell us we've been growing all of this time, but my society seems worse and I feel less safe and the planet's not getting any better. I don't expect them to have an answer, but I could at least say my lived experience does not align with what all you boffins are saying. And I'm not going to just be ashamed or feel stupid to say it. I'm going to say it. And then let's see where the conversation goes. Even that's a step towards reclaiming power.
Yeah, a very accessible one.
Yeah. We
And it's
can
that
all,
whole idea of agency, right? And
yes,
moving away from the consumer to the citizen.
yes, yes,
Interesting.
yes, yes. So let me give a 4-part description of power, because I found this one of the most useful things in all of the work I do. And I think once we've got it, and we'll repeat it next episode, it will become really helpful for all of us to think, okay, well, how could I do something differently? Whether I'm a financial advisor, economist, or just person trying to earn money, have a future, live my life. Okay. This comes originally from a social sociologist, social scientist called Stephen Lukes, and he's developed it over the years. And I'm going to simplify it. So if people are interested in looking into this properly, I think his book was called Types of Power by Stephen Lukes. It's quite a short book and quite readable. And he developed it over time. But I'll do it quite briefly. So power one, the first type of power, is when the conflict is really obvious. Like, we are having a disagreement. It's obvious we're having a disagreement. And the way it's resolved is very obvious. So it could be, a classic example is big country, small country. There's a piece of land. Big country says, so the conflict is overt. We are arguing over that piece of land. We both know we're arguing over that piece of land. You want it, I want it. We have a conflict. And the power is very overt. It's, well, I have a bigger army.
Mhm.
So I will roll my tanks in and I will, put your people in prison and it's mine and I win the conflict. So
Yep.
it's a very simple, another example. I mean, it's not a nice example. Sometimes parents and children arguing
Yeah.
about bedtime. It's time to go to bed. No, it's not. We have an overt conflict. We know we're arguing and we know what we're arguing about. And the parent just says, well, if you don't, you get no pocket money. Or even worse, I think this is a not good thing to do. They pick up the kid and they shove him in bed and
Yeah.
slam the door, right? It's power over. Okay. So that's power one. And that's the one we recognize. It's what, Donald Trump still thinks is
Yeah.
doing a deal, but it's considered the most obvious, most crude type of power. Power two is I get to control the agenda. So the conflict may be obvious or may not be, but my way of dealing with the conflict isn't I've got a bigger stick or I can put you in bed and close like a kind of physical force, but I hold power maybe through a role or something. So I can control the agenda. I can control what we discuss.
Okay.
So an example there would be I'm the head of economics, and just because you, postgraduate student, would like to talk about these weird fangled theories, we're not going to do it. Or there may be a member of my team who says, well, let's try and discuss this. Should we change our syllabus? And I might make sure that there's never time to discuss it, or that we know, it never
Okay.
gets on the agenda. So I'm still using my power and role, but in a slightly more covert way, to stop things being discussed. So there may again be an obvious conflict. My colleague wants us to think about how we do economics differently, but I make sure we never do, or that there's never time to do it properly, or, sort of kicking things in the long grass is a classic way of doing it. Governments do this all the time. Oh yes, well look at that. We'll do an inquiry, or we haven't got time in this parliament. So I'm still using my position to deal with usually an overt conflict. It's obvious that someone wants something to be different. But instead of invading you or throwing in your bedroom, I just make sure we don't discuss it.
Right.
And now this will be happening. I mean, I'll pause in a second because you tell me about financial advisors, but certainly in economics in recent years, there have been lots and lots of student groups who've been trying to get syllabuses changed, who've gone to the head of economics literally and said, we think this is too mathematical. Here's a letter from the Queen. We would like you to change economics. And I'd love people to kind of email in if they know how far this has gone. But generally, when they started, it was like, well, no, we're not going to discuss that. or, well, we'll have a discussion, but nothing's going to happen, or we'll kick it into the
Yeah.
long grass. That's still a form of power, and it's still a way of things not really changing. But at least people have mentioned it, so the conflict's still kind of open over.
Yeah.
How does that work in the financial
I
advice
was going to
world?
say I could see it working in the sort of the arena of religion and the
Mm,
mosque and orthodoxy versus sort of progressive thinkers who might want to look at, you know, pluralistic approaches to religion and
right.
maybe looking at things through different frameworks, but tradition and the sort of the orthodox are what, you know, where the power lies in terms of religious rulemaking or jurisprudence might be kind of stuck in a certain way and very dismissive of any alternative
So what
thinking.
happens if someone in the mosque, for example, says, "Actually, I've been thinking it's the 21st century, and it'd be really good for us to have a conversation as a community about how power works here and whether we
Yeah.
want to have some bits a bit more equal or something." What would happen? Would it just never
Yeah,
actually?
I mean, it might be. I mean, it depends on the sort of the situations. It's hard to say how it would pan out, but
Sure.
the guardians of the pulpit
Yes.
would probably, oh, but you know, we know best, and you know,
Yes.
blah, you know, etc., and maybe take a route down. You know, I don't know. You can't break with tradition
Yes.
and the way the status quo and this, that, the other, and
Yeah.
might
So
sort of brush it
so
away.
again, the conflict, I mean, it's not a big conflict, but the
No.
issue is overt,
Yeah.
right? But it's clear there are, excuse me, some people with power, the imam or who gets to kind of say, "Oh, no, we don't want to talk about that."
Yeah.
Well, we will talk about it, but everyone knows it's not a real thing. Or, maybe the head of economics invites the students to tea to listen to their concerns, but everyone knows nothing's going to change, right? That's about power. In the end, I write the syllabus. I have the power up around the meetings. And this happens all the time. Anyone in an organization knows that if you want something passed in the meeting, you have to do a lot of work before the meeting. That's a different form of power. Okay, we'll go further because neither of those are the main reason things don't change. I mean, the first one in this country, we're not having wars, but in some countries you do, right? In some countries you
Mm.
speak out against the state or you criticize the financial policy and you end up in prison. That's power one. Here, if you do it, it's more like, well, you've got the head of the Bank of England and you've got the treasurer, and you've got all the civil servants and the economics professors and the head of the IFA and all of this stuff. And if people say, well, let's talk about it differently, it's either, well, we know best, or there's lip service. I think that's a very good word. Okay. But it's still an execution of power because generally the people running those institutions run them because they've been brought up on the current business as
Mm.
usual way of doing it. They don't really want to think differently. Okay. The third type of power, now it gets interesting. And now it's more about citizens and what can we do. The third type is what Karl Marx called false consciousness, right? If I can get someone to grow up and believe that something that isn't really good for them is actually just fine, normal, and good for them, then they're not even aware there's a potential conflict there. So I don't need my tanks. I don't need to throw
Mm.
them in prison for asking questions about finance and economics. And I don't even need to go, oh, no, no, or pretend to have a tea party and listen. If I can get everybody to think, well, this is just how it is, and the economists and bankers know best, and that's fine for me because I'm stupid,
Mm.
that's still power.
Creating the herd
Creating
mentality.
hurt. And I might do that. I mean, maybe not deliberately, but I might do that through culture, through education, through socialization, through this idea in society that big men in suits who do maths and seem to sound like they know what they're talking about, that somehow they do and I don't. And they're powerful and clever and wise, even if I don't know what they're doing, and I'm not. So there's a whole, or I'm a consumer. Yeah, I'm here as a consumer. I might not be conscious of it, but my life's about buying more shit, and that's good. And as long as I get a nice holiday every year and can pay off my mortgage and buy a new sofa every few years, I'm doing fine. So Karl Marx said, and we don't need to be a communist to believe this, it was just an interesting idea.
Mm.
He's basically saying if you can get a whole load of people to believe that certain things that really aren't good for them are good for them and normal and fine, then there's no overt conflict. We don't know we're having a row, and that becomes a very powerful form of
Okay.
power. Gary Stevenson, this
Yeah.
economist who we've talked about, who's actually got a documentary on Channel 4 this week, he's very good because he's trying to wake people up. And he's trying to
Mm,
say, look, you need to understand what it means to you when there are trillionaires and billionaires, and you don't understand what it means for you. So he's trying to work. Yes, he's trying to change policy. And yes, he's trying to work at level two of getting agendas changed and
mm.
discussions of policies changed. Super. But actually, he's trying to wake people's consciousness up. So that's power three. Let me pause there and over to you.
Yeah, that herd mentality and that sort of consumer
Right.
behavior, I feel like I've never even seen that through the lens or
Yeah.
the framework of power.
That's the sneaky thing about it.
Yeah, it's just like you're conditioned, and because everyone's doing the same sort of thing and everyone's running the
Yeah,
same sort of race,
yeah.
it's almost like, why would you rock the boat? Why would you try and stand out and be different or
Well,
challenge it?
that actually is the next one.
Go on then,
So
straight
let's
on
do
to
the
the next
well,
one.
let's stay with the third one, because at the third one, I don't rock the boat because I don't think there's a boat to rock.
Right, okay.
I don't stand out because I think, well, this is fine.
This is the way
This
it's
is
this.
fine. Yeah, we need to grow the economy. Of course, we need to grow the economy. Of course, because that's what I've absorbed, and that's the story, and that's what I see everyone do, and that's what I'm told at school, and that's what the politicians talk about, and they're clever and powerful, and I'm not. So in the third one, I don't even think about rocking the boat because I'm persuaded in all sorts of ways that this current model, it's not that the emperor's got no clothes on. I really believe he's got a fine outfit. So I'm not going to say anything because he
Yeah,
looks great. And even if a tiny bit of me feels I don't think it is great, I don't listen to that. So that's
yeah.
the subtle thing.
For me, this
Mm.
sort of third one ties into this whole idea, which we talk about in this podcast, is mainly sort of centered around the money path and life path, and it
Yes.
and it is that my main purpose is
Yeah.
really to just
Yeah.
center my life around arranging and managing the number,
That's
and
right.
then life will happen and
Yeah.
life will be good.
That's how it
Rather than
is. It's
yeah,
normal. I'll
yeah,
retire. I'll have holidays.
yeah,
Boom, boom, boom,
yeah.
boom. Yeah. That's all. That's a good point you make. In our language, you say that's a story that doesn't work and isn't true. But as long as we just live as if it is, that's the false consciousness. That's
Mm,
the power. And the point is, there are people who benefit from us believing the stories of the status quo. They may not be evil or doing it deliberately, but if I don't know what, running a corporation or head of economics or writing books about finance or some investment manager, there are many, many people who benefit from everyone believing that the current model's kind of fine. And as long as I grow
mm,
my pension and have a bit of nice stuff and I'm a consumer, there are people who benefit in the short term. So this is false consciousness. And the point is the conflict is over, it's hidden. So I don't yet need to put my head above the parapet. Right. The fourth one is more about, okay, speaking out. Or why is it so hard to do things different? Or why can't I, Shabba, go to the next conference of financial advisors and stand there and say, I'm seeing things very differently. And I know you are starting to. And here, Stephen Lukes, the academic, had this model, borrows from a French, I guess, philosopher called Michel Foucault. And Michel Foucault talked about power and many, many other things. And what Foucault said is the ultimate form of power, again, I'm paraphrasing and simplifying, is when I police myself without realizing I'm doing it. So, through my own experience of anxiety, tension, shame, little voices in my head that I barely notice saying, oh, don't make a fool of yourself, Tim.
mm.
Or I even have a thought I might say something, but then I worry about the shame or the ridicule of the tribe, or I'm afraid of losing my job. Or so it's kind of fear, anxiety, tension, shame, all of these things. They're somehow in me And so I police myself. So even if I do have questions, let's say with level 3 false conscious, I start to think, this makes no sense, or I've read these books, or I'm deeply questioning stuff, or even though I've got money, it's not making me happy. So my experience starts to wake up and go, oh, I'm really not sure about this story. I continue to police myself as if I'm a good little boy, a good member of society, because to somehow act more freely or creatively as a true free adult citizen and live differently, speak differently, do financial advice differently, creates fear and shame and embarrassment. And the point that Foucault's saying is that's still power, but what's happened is we've internalized all of these other forms of power. So we don't need the army. We don't need the person telling us it's stupid. We don't even need the false consciousness. We keep ourselves, as it were, small, trapped, and constrained, and we do it. So this is where we start to get the choice of, well, if that's true, how do I work with that inner tension, fear, embarrassment? Over to you. How does that sound?
Yeah, I really like that 4-part framework. I think it's quite fascinating because I've never
Mm,
seen it sort of split in that way and highlighting the different power dynamics almost that are out there, and we probably encounter them all of the time, but are just not aware of,
every day.
and we're not aware of what's going on. And yeah, speaking out certainly for me is probably the most prevalent, which is, yeah, wow, I am actually policing myself in so many aspects, and that's quite a force.
It's the strongest. He calls it, my memories, he calls it biopower.
Okay.
It's kind of like inside us. And you're right. And I don't want to go down a Foucault rabbit hole, but I like what you say. It is quite a force. And the interesting thing is we're actually using so much of our own psychic energy
It's
to
draining.
to keep ourselves good little boys and girls.
Yeah.
Imagine what would happen if you chose, I don't want to say not to be scared, because it's okay to be scared, but if you chose simply to be free enough to
Mm.
say whatever you were thinking or ask the questions.
Yeah, which is the aim of the podcast, and promoting
Yeah.
the podcast and having the conversations, I think is part of that. So I'm conscious of time, and I think we're sort of coming to the end
Mm.
of part one. Is there anything you want to wrap up before we finish this particular
Well,
conversation?
not really. I mean, maybe over to you, or maybe it will come in the next one. But which bits of this land for you with your question? Because you, as I say, you've been through this rabbit hole about
Yeah.
growth, and you're really actively thinking about how might I have different conversations as a financial advisor, and how do I do that? So, do any of these levels of power, types of power, speak more or less to you with those questions?
Well, I'm linking it all because if I
Mm,
go back to my sort of question, which is why is it hard to talk about?
mm,
Well, that's clearly that fourth dynamic, um, where I'm policing myself. There's, the fear, the shame, all of that external stuff, which is stopping me from maybe saying as much as I would like to say outside, although I have started.
mm.
Um, and it explains why it sort of feels scary. But also, there's still this, element of false
Mm.
consciousness. And I think that's probably going down the chain of command in terms of where the messaging comes from for maybe quite a lot of our ideas. Maybe there's an element of people controlling the agenda for their own personal gain and for their own security, for their own safety in whatever it is that they're trying
And they
to.
don't, you mean people who write about this stuff or make TV shows about this
Yeah,
stuff, or,
yeah,
yeah, and they may not be conscious that that's what they're doing because they're also constrained by biopower. So they're writing
yeah,
certain versions of the world.
exactly.
Yeah.
So everyone's fixated in
Yeah.
some way, and like we said, maybe the politicians just aren't aware of quite a lot of the studies or the economics around
Yeah.
what's going on, but they've got their own social status and power to maintain
Yes.
because they're
Yes.
trying to protect their own money path
Yeah.
potentially as well. So I think this
Well,
goes.
they all interrelate. They
Yeah.
all interrelate, and we'll come on to this more in the next one. I want to make just a couple of points, and then I think this is a two-parter, so we won't necessarily leave people with a specific thing. I can imagine for you the other thing is, when you start talking about this stuff with some people, you need to find the right balance between, being free to say whatever you see and believe. That's level 4. But also, people are in a false consciousness. So some people may never have thought about this before. So, hopefully this podcast is waking people up. And as you said, there's lots of books and lots of economists and lots of people out there doing it. We can talk next time about why aren't they more mainstream, but that's also part of that. That's level 2, right? People who have alternative views that provoke the business as usual view don't get invited onto Question Time, don't get invited onto Newsnight, don't write newspapers, so they don't get on the agenda. They don't get access to sharing their story as much. So that's power too.
Yeah.
But for you, there's an interesting question of how do you, yes, be free and not constrained by but also communicate in a way that respects people might be in themselves at very different levels of understanding with this. And maybe you don't want to freak someone out. And I'm also imagining there's one other thing, which is a level 2 power, which is as a financial advisor in terms of the agenda and the meeting, there are some things you absolutely have to do. You have to make time for all the usual business as usual conventional stuff. And then this other thing, if it's there, gets to be an add-on. So it's like the any other business
Yeah.
or the extra thing. So I can see as a financial advisor wanting to shift, you're already constrained a little bit by things I have to do in a meeting and things I have to say. That keeps me in the prevailing norm. And then I need to really respect people maybe in a certain mode of consciousness, and yet I'm still trying to be free and creative. So it's a great challenge for you.
It is. And I think that comes back to that thing that we always say that, we're not being silly or stupid about money,
No,
because you could just alienate people very easily.
exactly. Yeah.
And so that's always the thing that I'm quite conscious about,
Yes.
especially professionally, is that you still need to answer people and allay the fears, worries and concerns that they have around certain money things.
Yes.
Because if you don't, then I think you've lost them anyway. So
That's right. And there are quite a lot of angry, kind of radical people who think that they've got this wonderful advanced consciousness and are very free. And they are, but they don't take anyone with them because they don't respect the other areas of power. So complicated stuff. I hope it's been helpful for you and for people listening.
It has. I'm looking forward to part 2. So I'll see you next time, Tim.
Cheers.